So, hi everyone. I'm here with Shuweib Abdulrehman, who's from Regulator. And Regulator, you guys are in the sort of like the AI, but also quality monitoring sort of customer quality kind of space, really. I suppose, particularly in sort of operational centres. So thanks very much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me.
I mean, so this whole sort of like QA kind of space has sort of been sort of evolving, and now we've got AI sort of going in the mix. But I mean, I suppose what are you seeing in terms of like the evolution in the market at the moment, and those kind of things?
No, definitely. We're seeing an imbalance really on two sides of the coin. So you've got firms that are adopting new technology, and then you've got firms that are basically digging their feet into the ground and doing things the old school way. Um, Now, looking at the technologies that are now available for firms, a lot of it is being sort of pushed through the telephony providers. So if you're a call center, you're using Five9, Genesis, 8x8, these sort of systems, they're now giving you tools for script checks, sentiment scoring, and these basic tools for little daily wins. So firms are adopting it, on a day-to-day basis on that side. On the other hand, firms are sticking to their guns and sticking to humans doing manual checks. And I believe that's because of consumer duty. There's a lot more that you're being held accountable for when it comes to the four outcomes. So you've now got compliance officers that are doing end-to-end assessments more regularly. They're looking at the affordability. Open banking isn't going to tell you what went wrong. You have to find it yourself.
I mean, and I know we've had call transcription for a while. I mean, but although there's still I believe there's still quite a lot of like sample checking that's out there. I mean, it's like how is that kind of changing? I suppose because it's been evolving. I mean, it's not like the transcription piece isn't new. I mean, we've had that for a while. I mean, where do we have to take it? Where's it sort of like being taken to the next level? I suppose.
So I don't want to be too biased on what we've been able to achieve and what we're seeing on the market, but when you're looking at core transcription solutions at this moment in time, they are looking at the low-hanging fruit, which is like script disclosure. What we put our energy into is actually policy and understanding the product knowledge, understanding the advice, the regulations. So if you look at what is available right now in the market, these solutions don't understand what the Texas model is and all the nuances of a vulnerable customer. There was actually one software that we saw when it came to sentiment scoring. If you're Scottish, no matter how happy you are, the sentiment scoring software will flag you as depressed because of the tone. And if you're from Liverpool, no matter how depressed you are, the sentiment scoring flags you as happy. So when it comes to, because with the transcriptions, what they do is they get the keywords, and then based on the nuances of the keywords, they say, okay, this is how someone feels. Or they do the sentiment scoring based on the pitch as to how they sound. Now, what I see moving forward with transcription is sort of what we're seeing in the legal sector with like Harvey and Legora, is automation of administration. So, for example, I spoke to someone who works in an insurance company, one of the leading ones in the UK, and a lot of the call center agents at the end of a call, the call transcript is assessed and the notes are done for them. They have a window of time to approve the notes to make sure they're correct, and then they move on to the next call.
So I suppose that's where AI is sort of coming in. So you're saying in terms of like building that additional complexity, in terms of like understanding. I mean, the regional differences are kind of interesting in terms of like how you sort of build that in. If it's just built off a generic model or for more bespoke models, but is that where you sort of like you can see like this new AI overlay that sort of sits on top of, I suppose, on top of the transcriptions that we didn't have before, and that's where the new sort of frontier is.
I believe so. Eventually, everyone is going to be using this, just because if you're not, you're missing out on a more cost-effective and time-effective approach to your day-to-day operations. So everyone will be heading in that direction at one point or another. It's just whether you're going to be doing it internally or through your telephony system, which sort of spoon feeds you the latest AI, as we can see with a lot of call centers.
Yeah, and I suppose how do you use AI to look at? So, for example, you mentioned policy in the background or regulation in the background. Is that something that you think is going to be able to be compared, so it becomes much more sort of contextual?
That's a good question. Anthropic and OpenAI, they both are opening new offices in London in the last 2 years. So they're doubling down on entering, the financial capital of the world, which is London, and entering these complex cases. Now, regarding if you're a company and you just use ChatGPT out of the box, it's not going to do it for you. It's going to hallucinate. It's not going to understand your policy. So firms will have to have a bespoke solution if they want to see a real result. That will be either internally or through a third party where they collaborate. The thing is now that capability is becoming more and more accessible. When it comes to creating your own vector database, where an LLM does RAG. So RAG is basically where it goes to this database. Imagine a big location full of knowledge. It goes, it finds the answer, and comes back. So what some firms are doing are using out-of-the-box LLMs, having their own dedicated vector base or knowledge base, I should call it, that understands the company processes. And whenever they need to ask a question, it is getting relevant answers based on the internal procedures.
And do you think you can sort of apply that against obviously individual calls, right? So I mean, it's just that whole contextual piece. So for example, different regional kind of linguistics, or I suppose, or words, or different kind of approaches to things, in like those cultural interpretations, but then also policy interpretations, like did it actually follow this, and sort of keeping that up to date. I mean, all of those things are difficult where you've got like a hard fix kind of system, but become easier if you've got a more, I suppose, more flexible, sort of like almost like a human type of interpretation.
Yeah, the way you're going to get there is almost if you intend to replace the human, because then you'll be creating a solution that takes into consideration the customer journey, the advice, the suitability. A simple way to do it at this stage is a decision tree. So it's like customer starts here, products finish here. What in between here and here determines what they leave with. And by just isolating each branch on the decision tree, that's already a way that firms can sort of determine if the customer is leaving with the right thing. And that's actually how firms right now in insurance, in particular, are determining what scripts the agents should use. So you just take that logic and apply it to product knowledge. Looking at the debt sector, there's certain markers for affordability. The person has to be earning this much, have this much level of debt. They can't own this value of assets. The decision tree keeps going down. And then you add an AI model that understands the nuances along the way.
And what's been your experience, I suppose, of like implementing AI and implementing, some of these new tools and techniques, etc.? Because I mean, it's moving at such a pace. I mean, even in the last sort of 3 months, let alone the last 6 months. I mean, like things are changing very, very quickly. I mean, how do you sort of like stay up to date? And what are some of the challenges, I suppose, in implementing it, particularly when you're doing product design or process design? I mean, because that can be checked, because it is really moving that fast.
Sure. So one of the things that we actually got wrong in the start is that we wanted to be a data controller. We've completely changed our attitude towards data and become a data processor, because that is the most common concern for consumer credit firms, is where their data is going, how it's being stored. So now obviously if you have an AI solution that only gets better using data, how do you navigate around that? And that's where you have things like data anonymization. You have synthetic data sets, you have workarounds where you have a feedback loop that improves the solution. Now, internally at Regulator, we can't rely on the latest and greatest AI labs to do our work for us. So we do our own R&D. And because Anthropic doesn't have a special interest in Conc 7 and Conc 8, what we're doing is we have sort of like our own internal benchmarking, where we have like, so are you familiar with SLMs and LLMs, the difference?
Explain. Explain.
So basically an LLM is a large language model, which means it has more parameters. A parameter, in simple, let's just call it its brain. And an SLM has less parameters, which means it has a smaller brain. But in actual fact, that smaller brain might be specialized to a given task more than the section of that brain for the bigger one. And that's basically what Mixtral, they're an AI lab, do, is their logic is if you give the AI less information and less extensive capability, it can focus on a task. So what we've actually done with an SLM is it was much easier to create a dedicated vulnerability detector using an SLM than an LLM, because we could just say, look, these are all the different drivers of a vulnerable person, whether it's capacity, life events, resilience. Whereas with an LLM, it would go around their houses. It would get confused a lot of the time because it's overwhelmed with its own knowledge. So that's what we do internally. And if you are going to challenge the sort of what's available, you're going to have to do it internally. You can't just wait for these AI labs to do it for you.
You're taking training data to be able to train the small language models sort of internally, and then using that as a suite of models within your own product.
Yes. I'll have to not answer too much about our secret sauce, but yes, you're on the right lines.
Okay. But I suppose how are you finding, I suppose, the gap, I suppose, between what we might be talking about here is like, well, here's what the cutting edge is, this is what can be done, this is how we can sort of put it into a product, and then the reaction, I suppose, when you're there talking with maybe prospective customers or those kind of things. I mean, how much of a gap do you think there is in terms of, I suppose, people are sort of on the leading edge of it versus where most of us live every day, I suppose, where operations live every day? I mean, is that a big gap, or do you think it's closing?
Well, my dad thinks generative AI is real. So you have like them videos of like a giraffe and monkeys being best friends. So we're seeing AI everywhere. Whether you deal with it or not is a different story. A lot of the decision makers are businessmen. They're looking at the numbers. They're saying, is this worth it? We don't really care about how it makes everyone feel. Do the numbers add up? So yeah, with our solution, it's 20 times quicker than listening to a call, and it's 10 times cheaper. Where you expose yourself is, the hallucinations, engineering the wrong solution. It's like coding. If you were to use AI to build an app, you might do the app much quicker, but then it might have a lot more vulnerabilities. Now, the new school mindset is you're speaking to people that are already using AI. Like, look at yourself. You're using open source models. You're seeing the value of it. So that's actually it's a fun type of objection to get, is when a firm is like, yeah, we're already looking at these things. Then you're actually speaking to someone that's on the ball. But right now, at this moment in time, a lot of firms are very cautious. And a lot of the AI that's being used in firms is through third parties, not internally.
Yeah, and I suppose one of the challenges, I suppose, is at what point do we sort of rethink business models? So a lot of the AI is sort of like you see in the market, I see in the market, it tends to be, I suppose, a faster version of what we've already got, or a cheaper version of what we've already got. At what point? Where's the gap, I suppose, in terms of new capability, and are we thinking about in terms of this is what else it can do? So I sort of, I know we typically buy things that we're comfortable with, but there's also new capability that can potentially be out there. I mean, do you see sort of like a need for that? I mean, where do you think it would be in this kind of space?
I see the future being agentic solutions. Right now, chatbots are just a glorified search. If you've been working in, let's say, the debt sector for 10 years, most of the answers. You don't really need a chatbot. Where you're going to start seeing a lot of the value is when you have an AI model that's sort of like a team member, where you can say, I've got this customer right now. They look suspicious. Go away and come back to me and tell me what you think, right? And the agentic solutions use their own intuition and the systems that they have access to. So if, for instance, you give an agentic solution access to the CMS, or some people call it the CRM, the customer data, the fact find, you've got the call recordings, you've got the credit file, it starts building a story as to why this customer might be suspicious for fraudulent behavior and so on. So I definitely think the future will be agentic solutions. We have seen that in other industries, like with OpenClaw, and as well as with Claude Cowork. But the way to get there is workflows, integrating more systems into your process rather than just sticking to what you're doing right now, you can then use a layer of AI to interact with the systems that you currently have. So, for example, we currently are in talks with AccountScore, so Equifax, for their open banking, where we can basically query the affordability assessment. So you're not just looking at the call and, was the advisor leading? You're also looking at the numbers. Was the advisor discussing the correct figures based on what was available? So yeah, 10 years from now, I wouldn't be shocked if you, Chris, had your own personal AI agent, and if you wanted to update your insurance, you'd send your agent to go speak to the insurance company, who'd have an AI agent waiting for you. And then we're all just the human in the loop. That AI agent reports back to a human on what's happened, and your AI agent reports back to you. And then you just keep telling them what to do.
But I mean, I do think going back to the debt collections piece, I mean, one of the things that's always been tricky has been these end-to-end customer journeys that you kind of managed, and like, how do you knit all those elements together, and how do you pull call records going back, how do you pull the customer management system records going back, and how do you go back all the way almost like back to like application stage, and then work out, well, where was the issue? And that's just incredibly complicated to do as a human. I mean, multiple systems, I mean, legacy systems, it's a bit of a nightmare. And really expensive, and people are like doing like 1 an hour, those sorts of things. But using AI agents and sort of like AI quality kind of controls, you could do that almost like on a mass scale, which would be kind of interesting. That would be like night and day different from what we have today, right? I mean, so people would be loving that capability.
Well, with one of our clients, they looked at the unit cost for a file. When you compare it, so you're looking at anywhere between £17 to £25 an hour for a QA, versus our unit cost, you're looking at anywhere between £2 to £3 an hour. Assuming an hour is a call recording hour. Naturally, they said, we're going to go from listening to 10% of calls to 100%, because it's now affordable. That's now an option. So you've got that capability of being able to have significantly more oversight, which supports the business. Another hidden cost that people don't really talk about is the customer acquisition cost. Firms are spending £40,000-50,000 a month on Google just to generate all this business. And then 1 year later, the customer's walking away because the plan wasn't affordable. You need to have a system in the early stages that's looking at the quality of your book. So 1 year from now, and you're doing your forecast, that these customers aren't leaving, because that is a real issue in the debt sector.
It's kind of interesting to a lot of AI. We talk about cost and how it can sort of like, and we're fearful of cost, and it's like, is it going to take jobs away, those kind of things. But actually, when push comes to shove, often it's just repurposed to being, well, we need to do more for the same money or less, rather than just cutting back on things, right? And it's kind of interesting that when people get pressed, then that seems to be the result. And you just wonder if that's going to happen with AI more generally. I mean, certainly I find it is like, I'm now busier now than I was, because it's giving me more things to do. I can get more done, right? So it's a bit mad. Sometimes it feels.
Yeah, at the start of AI, I thought, I was a doomsdayer as well. Basically, I was like, we're all useless now. we're all gonna be like pensioners in a care home, and the AI models are gonna do everything for us. And then when you look more and more into it, it actually just boosts productivity. We're not saying to companies, get rid of your QAs. We're saying, get your QAs to do more in less time. I do think what it will challenge is business process outsourcing. Because if you're outsourcing right now, you're doing it because you want to get more for less. And AI gives you more for less. So you now have something that is a direct challenger to outsourcing. And under a controlled environment, you have less data insecurity. One of the things that we do that's quite appealing for firms is, for smaller firms, we do pay-as-you-go models, right? So instead of you having to make a big commitment to a contract in South Africa or to a QA in the UK, you can ensure that your consumer duty checks are being done at a per unit cost. So that's basically what you'd want to see throughout the industry, is technology is more accessible.
Yeah, I do wonder, I'm thinking about as A brings stuff back, or as it brings stuff back in house, and obviously we've had the news around the Fable model with Anthropic that came out over the last week or so, is just really around business continuation plans on some of this stuff, and whether we'll see a move to small language models and local models and those kind of things as a result of that, because things can change at the last minute, right? And that can cause a big problem for businesses, particularly as it gets more and more embedded in people's business processes. I mean, I'm not sure do you think that's the direction of travel? Because it is kind of worrying when, I suppose, when you think you've got something and then it kind of changes, right?
I think it's the culture. I think the culture is going to decide. Obviously, regulations as well. So you've got like ISO 42001 now for artificial intelligence management systems. So there is, and you've got like the EU AI Act. You've got a magnifying glass on how companies are using AI, specifically in this neck of the woods, the UK and Europe. Whereas in America, I would agree, companies are becoming clearly leaner. And, not to go too much of a tangent, but if you look at like Y Combinator, which are like the biggest accelerator in the world, they've invested in your Airbnbs, your Dropboxes, your Twitches, your Coinbases. They're encouraging founders to basically say, don't sell to the company, be the company. Don't sell to a debt advice company. Set up your own debt advice company with loads of AI agents, and we'll just invest. So I think in America, you are going to see the replacement of existing companies with, new companies in that sense that are much leaner. However, in the UK, it's going to be down to culture and regulation. Culturally speaking, a lot of firms are not really on board with AI, and when that cultural shift takes place, you'll see a massive catalyst in AI adoption. That's what you're going to see. And then regulation-wise, right now, AI models can't give advice in the UK, right? I've spoken with the FCA about it. AI models cannot give advice. So if that doesn't change, then the sort of exposure that AI is going to have to customers won't change as quick. And that's why we focused on the back office, the administrative side, the monitoring, because it's in a controlled environment. You're spoon feeding the compliance team for what they shouldn't be missing.
Yeah, I do think there's a difference in terms of like regulatory kind of approach. I suppose it's just how important do you think, I suppose, the governance side of it is, and making sure you have control over the models as well. So particularly when you're because you've got the outsourcing requirements, and I suppose if the requirements at the outsourcer gets mandated down, or say we had changes when we went from ChatGPT 3.5 to 4. I mean, that's ancient history now, but it kind of happened. But it changed the way the output kind of came, and like how we got to think about that and embed that into our processes.
Firms need to determine what they're actually looking for from the AI. I give an example. So we use all the top AI lab LLMs because we need to always be comparing them. We've got our own we've got our own open source models that we fine tune to our liking and our use case, but we still benchmark them. But I remember I was at a talk the other day and someone asked me, it's like, are you using Mythos? Are you using Fable? I said, we are trying to achieve this task, and this many AI models help us achieve it. If there's a new latest model, right, and that achieves it, fine, but that doesn't mean we need to change. It's like having a car. If your car gets you from A to B, you don't need to always upgrade your car. So firms need to just determine what they're looking to achieve with AI and then achieve it, and not keep replacing it and sort of having FOMO for the latest technology. Rather just adopt it and see it on a day-to-day basis.
The other thing you kind of mentioned, which has been an interesting journey for me at least anyway, has been like this whole sort of world of APIs and API, almost like a sub-economy of APIs, which you can basically API into all sorts of different channels, different technologies everywhere. And it's very frustrating when they don't have APIs. So for example, hotel booking as an example, I can't get an API to book a hotel at Hilton as an example, or Holiday Inn or whatever it is, right? And I suppose the difference between services that used to protect against bots scraping for pricing, and then the ability for my agent to then be able to go in and actually book stuff. I mean, there's this new sort of like economy that's building up, this almost like AI economy that's building up underneath the surface, that that unless you're in it, I was never aware of it, right? And I don't know if you sort of see that sort of changing, or even when you're integrating with other systems, which is having an API ready and being able to do things through APIs makes a massive difference if you've got AI development in place. I mean, and I just wonder if you're sort of going to see that sort of like developing, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. There's going to be less gatekeeping when it comes to technology. The fun thing is that if you have, let's say, your hotel website, and they don't want to be optimized for AI, there's now like Perplexity and OpenAI. They've created their own browsers where you can get AI models to interact with web pages. You have like early adoption technology like the Rabbit R1. It was basically like a handheld device with rabbits, and you tell the rabbits what to do, and it could go on TripAdvisor, it could go on Uber. So even if there are not APIs, you're going to have AI models that can interact with websites. How that will go is a different question. You've got like OpenClaw and Claude burning through credits. There was one firm that actually spent $500 million. So, you know, when you just let things loose, there aren't really restrictions, whereas with APIs, it's more of a controlled environment. What I would say is legacy systems are basically holding clients captive, right? So if you're, let's say, a bank and you've used SAP for the last 30 years, right? Or 20 years, and it's got all your data. Even if you found a SAP alternative that is so much better than SAP, the sort of friction of doing that data migration is ridiculous. You're going to stick with SAP, you know, and because people in companies, and this is where I talk about the culture, their KPIs are sort of incentivized based on the now and the next 1 to 2 years. They're not thinking in 10 years from now, this would have been the best decision ever. They're thinking about what works for my current measurements of being a good employee.
Yeah, so you've got to have that longer kind of term view. So just, I mean, going back to, I suppose, quality, and you talked about, I mean, with APIs, I mean, AIs talking to AIs and sort of like my agent being able to book my hotel sort of, you know, directly and sort of coming back to me and those kind of things. How does that work, I suppose, in the financial services space? I mean, particularly in terms of like, we've got voice bots as an example. Do you think you're going to have technology such as yours, then actually monitoring the AI, if you see what I mean? So we're going to have this like layered kind of AI that's going to sort of start developing.
Are you sure you don't have a microphone in my office? Tell me the truth. Yeah, definitely. Because yeah, there always needs to be. So the simplest way I put it is right now you have layer 1 QA and then layer 2, which is compliance. So usually layer 1 is the quality assurance officers. They deal with the day-to-day internal advisor operations. Compliance are much more oversight for the company, but they also look at the customer journeys, customer complaints, FOS dealings. The way I see it is our system becomes layer 1 and everyone moves up a layer. So the QAs now are overseeing the AI and the compliance are overseeing the QAs that oversee the AI. But then a lot more work gets done. Now, if you had a company that was basically just AI agents, you would need to have a separate system that is able to measure how compliant they are. You know, if you're like, we don't tell our system to measure itself. We have a feedback loop mechanism. So if there was ever a moment where the end user was like, Regulaitor was wrong on this one, they would be able to troubleshoot that. They could say it's a policy error, explain why. And then we have a self-improving system that looks at the question, looks at the output, and starts challenging the other ways it could have been answered based on the QA or compliance officer's feedback.
And I suppose just going into that, I suppose around transparency as well, like, so how do you sort of start to think about that in terms of like, I suppose, in reporting too? So, you know, we've obviously got consumer duty board reports going out now. I mean, that's sort of like that sort of wave sort of going through. How do systems such as the QA systems fit into that? And are there different kind of metrics and reports we can look at? And then how do you then look at transparency as well to make sure that this isn't just a black box that happens elsewhere and you can actually audit it almost like to a certain extent? Because the evidencing part's kind of important.
Sure. So on that point, first of all, I would say with what exists right now for compliance and QA, it's not really supporting the Consumer Duty Board reporting objectives. It's not really supporting MI. A lot of firms simply have an Excel spreadsheet where they track certain metrics and then they consolidate it and say, this is the thematic review this month. This is the trend that we're seeing. And some firms are moving to Power BI, but it's the same sort of muscle memory. You're putting data on a sheet and you're looking at it. Now, with Regulator, on the other hand, we actually can do a lot of the human quality work, such as, a full compliance check, on the customer journey, the call, and so on. So, for example, I've got a client's report in front of me. I won't tell you their names. But for example, you had this one agent that between question 10 and question 17, they made 5 failures. Now, question 10 to question 17 specifically was on the solutions. So like do nothing, self-help, debt respite scheme, IVAs, debt management plans, insolvencies, and so on. So we know, based on a thematic review, that X% of agents in a firm are making this mistake. And this is how we're going to highlight how we train advisors moving forward. But the thing is, right now, a compliance officer is doing that one at a time. It's not scalable. Whereas if you have a system that's doing it for 100% of calls, in a very short amount of time, you're like, okay, this is the vulnerability point in our business. Our advisors aren't getting the Texas model right, or our advisors are leading when it comes to affordability questions. Our advisors aren't even saying the calls may be recorded for training quality purposes, but you're getting that much quicker. And then that MI can be obviously transferred to the consumer duty reports and for decision making within the business.
I mean, often it's the trending that becomes important, doesn't it? So, like, is it improving? And if you've got an issue, how did you deal with it? But you kind of need the data to be able to say, this is where there might be an issue. And I suppose do the existing KPIs really drill down to some of the issues you can get by listening to calls or by looking at use cases, which maybe is like AI can sort of help us to get to some of that.
Yeah, exactly. So, I've worked in equity release, I've worked in mortgage brokering, I've worked in multiple different financial advisors. And, management, I used to go to them and say, look, how do you know that this is going wrong? And how do you know that it stopped going wrong? And a lot of the time they basically say we don't. The amount of people in an office compared to the management team, it's a massive disparity. So a lot of the time the manager, the compliance officer goes in with what they're looking for. They're saying, this month I'm looking for people who are not making a good call to action or a good recommendation. But if, let's say, I'm your trainer and I'm advising you and I'm saying, Chris, next week we need you to stop making this mistake. How many calls do I need to listen to verify that you stop making this mistake? And if I do that, how many other agents aren't getting my attention? So right now, firms aren't able to really plot the data and track the progress. So what you're having is like a repeat cycle of every couple months you're starting again with the agent, but they might be making the same mistake last year. You just don't have a good way of seeing the trend and handling it.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a technology question there, which is you've got to have the technology to be able to monitor that. But I do also think there's almost like a bit of a cultural question, or like how do you come up with the ideas? So people are going to have to come up with the ideas or the imagination. So maybe it's an imagination question, like, how do I imagine what the problem is, and how do I ask the right question to the technology to be able to look at some of those kind of things? And that sort of like links into experience and those kind of things as well. But it feels like that. I just wonder if that's going to be more important going forward. Is how do we imagine or come up with the intuition to look at particular areas rather than just doing what we've always done, right? So, and that's something we're going to have to work on, I think.
We all need to become forward deployed engineers. So, with Palantir, one of the things that sort of set them apart with their clients is they'd have forward deployed engineers. They sort of coined this job role where you'd have someone who's technical and product savvy. So right now, let's look at Regulator, for instance. You got someone that really understands financial advice and financial products and the process. Then on the other side of the table, you have someone that really understands technology. When are you going to merge the two into one person? So then you can say, in real time, these are the applications we're seeing. So long as you have two people not seeing eye to eye, the final product is always different. And you can see that in banks, you can see that in insurance companies whenever they're trying to do an update to their in-house software that they've made. What the people actually need and what the dev team agree to do, two different things, because they're validating the problem differently. So you need someone in the middle that basically understands the technical side, not to the highest level, understands the product and the actual pain point, and then they can merge the two and say, all right, this is a solution. And that's basically what Regulator is. You have someone that's been a financial advisor, that's done their time learning about AI and also has brought on a technical team to basically say, we know what the problem is. We can solve it for you. And the amount of energy it would take for you to solve this for yourself, it wouldn't be worth it. It's only worth it for us because we're going to be serving so many companies.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a fascinating area. I mean, like, where do you think the next sort of? I usually say where the next 5 years is, but where do you think the next year and a half is going to be in this kind of space? I mean, where do you think we're going?
Is it specifically in consumer credit or just in general?
Specifically in consumer credit, I think. Yeah.
I think. Well, you can already see some movement. So I would say whatever is being adopted now, within a year and a half, a lot of other firms would have caught up. And whichever firms are leading the way, they're probably going to start building somewhat in-house. I think so. But you've got the question, and this is separate to AI. Is it worth building in-house versus outsourcing? And there's always the pros and cons. I've seen some companies have the oldest system and 20 developers on site. And you just think you could have just got a subscription and saved a lot of money, saved a lot of time, just to end up not being happy with the product. And then the product you make, you can't even sell to other companies because they're your competition. So you're just spending all this time and energy for just yourself. So like, for instance, I know ClearScore, they're a mortgage brokering company. And they also do like other unsecured lending. They have something similar to like their own in-house mortgage brain. So let's say you ask it a question about different products. It's kind of like ChatGPT understands the in-house products and external products and filters it for the advisors. So I think advisors are going to start having assistants during calls, not on the call, but just by them during the call, like your own personal ChatGPT. I do think that's going to happen because they're doing it. So more firms are going to do it. I think you've got like the telephony systems that are pushing their AI. So I think more firms are going to adopt it. But in a year and a half from now, you're going to have more firms that have sort of like broken the system where they're like, okay, now we have an opinion. We know that this doesn't work for us. We know that this part does. So, and then I'll ask you this question, Chris, because obviously you've worked a lot in management, specifically in the financial services sector. Do you think if employees had access to tools that allowed them to do more work, they would do less work because they would have a tool that could offset them doing less?
I think most of the time people want to do a good job. And so typically if they have a tool, they want to do a better job. And so if they can use that tool to do a better job, they will probably use it and take the opportunity to do a better job. Either be more productive and I think that's just a rule throughout history. You're going to get some people who want to sort of like sit back and do it, but I mean that's the case in any place, right? And some people are dissatisfied, but I think generally people will use a tool to do more. Because people want to get on, right? Most people want to get on. We all want to get on. We want to spend time, do better, do better for our families, do whatever it is. And I think that's a human condition kind of thing.
No, definitely. Well, it's refreshing that from your experience, you've got that observation. I've heard of stories like when Elon Musk, he had I think it was called the Department of Efficiency. Or he had a task force in America. One of the things that they pointed out is that there'd be like people in call centers with like a mouse wriggler. So they'd go away from their desk and there'd be like this thing that moves the mouse. And because there's tens of thousands of people working in these offices, they wouldn't get flagged up or basically doing no work. So there is sometimes a question, does technology make people do less? We definitely believe our system empowers compliance and QA officers to do more. Because a lot of the time when we're speaking to them, we've interviewed over 50 people that, are performance and coach, learning and development, compliance, QA, team leaders. And a lot of the time they want to do their job. It's just there's things that get in the way, such as slow systems, fragmented systems. We have people that spend their weekends listening to calls. Yeah. That's ridiculous. Get your weekend back.
Yeah, I mean, and the mouse wriggler thing. I mean, yeah, I'm sure it happened, but I think that's probably not necessarily just the blame of the technology. There's deeper issues there around sort of like motivation and whether people feel like they're doing a good job and those kind of things. I think there's other things. It's very easy to blame the technology, whereas I think generally people want to do better. I mean, and they're probably even if they got a mouse wriggler, they're probably taking the time off so they can do something else anyway, rather than just being inherently sort of like just sitting back and sort of going for a kip or something. I don't know.
So on that point, I think culturally it's about upskilling. So some firms are really, on board with saying we want our employees to be more capable. And instead of sending them away to do courses, the new task is actually just having better technology at their fingertips. If you've got a compliance officer that's used Regulaitor versus a compliance officer that hasn't, even if they stop using our system, they're definitely more AI savvy now, because they've been using a system that's sort of been leveraging that use case.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a really interesting kind of area, and I think it's sort of developing fast. So I appreciate you sort of like taking me through it, at least and showing me the systems like where the cutting edge is. So I really appreciate it, and and we'll see how it sort of develops over the next couple of weeks. So thanks very much, Shuweib.
Thank you very much for your time.